They didn't conquer cities. They didn't command armies. They didn't even need to fight, because long before battles began, the real ninja had already changed what was real. Orders arrived that were never written. Alliances collapsed for reasons no one could explain. Castles prepared for wars that never came. The real ninja were not killers. They were thieves of reality. They didn't destroy the enemy. They stole the world the enemy thought he was living in. If you're drawn to the hidden side of history, subscribe to Fragments of History. Leave a like if stories like this deserve to be told, and comment what city you're watching from. When you hear the word ninja, you don't picture a person. You picture a weapon, a blade cutting through darkness, a figure dressed in black dropping from rooftops, shurikens spinning through moonlight toward a waiting throat. This is the ninja everyone thinks they know, the assassin, the killer, the shadow warrior whose purpose is death. Hollywood built franchises on that silhouette. Video games turned it into a costume you can wear. Martial arts schools promised to teach deadly techniques, as if the secret was only muscle and steel. And every version circles the same obsession: combat, how ninja killed, what weapons they used, which strikes were fatal. The entire modern understanding of ninja narrows into violence and the tools that deliver it. You can buy ninja weapons online: swords, throwing stars, chains, climbing claws, objects designed to look ancient, to feel forbidden, to suggest efficiency. Killing as a product, mystery as a checkout item. Demonstrations do the same thing in motion: how to move silently, how to strike from behind, how to vanish after impact. The performance isn't about history, it's about perfecting the image of violence, about becoming a more effective killer through discipline and control. Hollywood refined this into pure spectacle. Ninja films measure worth in body counts, impossible acrobatics, assassinations performed with superhuman precision. The best ninja is the one who kills cleanest, fastest, most beautifully. Death turned into choreography. It works because violence is simple, it's visual, it creates immediate stakes. A ninja stalking a target is a perfect scene. Will he succeed? Will he be caught? No explanation needed. The audience understands the danger before a word is spoken. Violence is also universal. Every culture recognizes killing. You don't need to understand feudal Japanese politics to follow an assassination plot. A fight scene crosses borders without translation. Blood does the talking. So the ninja as assassin became the dominant image, not because it was accurate, but because it sold. Tickets, games, training, merchandise. The incentives all leaned in the same direction until the silhouette became truth. And it satisfied something deeper too, the fantasy of invisible power, moving through the world unseen, carrying the ability to erase anyone. Elite, dangerous, untouchable. People don't just watch that fantasy, they pay to inhabit it. The ninja became aspirational. Children play at it. Adults train for it. A whole culture formed around the belief that ninja represent a kind of power worth chasing. Deadly, mysterious, elite power. But that obsession with killing hides something more important, something that explains why ninja mattered historically, and why the real story is more unsettling than any assassination fantasy. Because the best ninja never killed anyone. The most successful operations never required violence. And the true power of ninja clans had little to do with combat at all. The real ninja were not in the business of bodies. They were in the business of reality, of changing what people believed was true. So thoroughly that targets made decisions inside worlds that didn't exist. An assassination is visible. A body is proof. It creates evidence, triggers investigations, produces martyrs, starts retaliation. It is noisy, messy, and unpredictable, the crudest tool for a political outcome, and the real ninja understood that with cold clarity. They understood that killing someone could be the worst way to neutralize them, that violence multiplies problems, that death ends information and creates new enemies. That chaos can't be directed once it starts running. The goal was not to remove actors, It was to control outcomes, and you control outcomes by changing what those actors perceive as real, by feeding false information that feels solid, by building a situation where rational decisions produce catastrophic results, by making someone defeat himself while believing he is acting wisely. That is what the violent myth covers up: the sophistication, the innovation, the reason feudal lords hired ninja clans even while despising what they represented. Not because ninja were good at killing. Samurai could kill. Soldiers could kill. Assassination, when truly necessary, was never a rare skill. Death was common in that world, cheap. What was rare was the ability to enter an enemy's decision-making process and corrupt it from within, to make a lord see threats that weren't there and miss the ones that were, to turn a commander's logic into a weapon against him. That required skills with no glamour attached, forging documents that could survive scrutiny, impersonating officials, engineering rumor, infiltrating organizations, and observing without detection, understanding psychology well enough to predict how people would react when you placed a lie in the right hands. These were ninja skills, not swordsmanship, not acrobatics, but acting, forgery, patience, manipulation. The work of intelligence operatives, not warriors. And the work was meant to be invisible. No dramatic rooftop, no spinning blade, no climactic duel. Only information moving through networks, quietly altered, until decisions began to fail, alliances began to rot, and events unfolded in ways that served the unseen hand shaping them. You can't build an action movie around that. You can't sell toys based on rumor engineering. You can't make a video game where victory depends on convincing someone that a forged letter is authentic. Entertainment needs visible impact. Real ninja work was designed to leave none, so myth replaced reality. The assassin replaced the operative. The killer replaced the manipulator. The story that could be filmed buried the story that actually mattered. And in burying it, the myth hid something darker about power itself. Because the most dangerous person is not the one who can kill you. It's the one who can change what you believe is real, who can make you act against your own interests while you remain certain you're being rational, who can steal your reality and replace it with one that serves them. That was the real ninja, not the warrior in black, but the thief of certainty, the engineer of false worlds, the kind of enemy who wins before anyone understands a fight has begun. And once you see that, the black costume stops being the mystery. The mystery is what was happening in plain sight, while everyone was watching the rooftops. A dead body is evidence. It proves someone was there. It triggers questions. It demands explanations. It is the opposite of what effective intelligence requires. When a high-value target dies without warning, people start counting motives. Who benefited? Who had access? Who had the capability? Every assassination leaves a trail. One investigators follow backward, and that trail threatens everyone connected to the operation. Real ninja clans understood this with brutal clarity. Killing was not a demonstration of mastery. It was a confession, an admission that you could not get what you wanted through quieter methods, that your infiltration was incomplete, that your manipulation failed. The goal was never to remove people, it was to control outcomes. And most outcomes were easier to control when nobody died, when everyone stayed alive but believed different things were true. Assassinate an enemy leader and his organization doesn't vanish, it reshapes. A successor rises, angry and alert. Security hardens. Paranoia becomes policy. You eliminate one person and make everyone else more difficult to reach. A tactical success that breeds strategic failure. Now compare the alternative. You don't kill the leader. You feed him information that corrodes him from the inside. You make him believe his closest advisors are plotting. You create proof of betrayals that never happened. And then you step back and watch him destroy his own structure with rational decisions based on what you placed in his hands. No body, no investigation, no successor demanding blood. just an organization unraveling itself while believing the collapse is necessary. Death also ends information flow. A dead person cannot be questioned, cannot be turned, cannot keep making decisions you can anticipate and exploit. Once someone is dead, they stop being useful. But someone who believes false things is endlessly useful. They plan inside a broken map. They spread that map to others. They act predictably because you know what they think is true. They become a living instrument for the reality you've engineered. That is why ninja clans valued long-term infiltration over quick assassination. An embedded operative who spends years building trust is worth more than an assassin who strikes once and disappears. The operative can bend decisions repeatedly, can poison information systematically, can make an entire organization serve your purposes without knowing it. Killing that operative just to take one target would be a waste. Trading years of access for a single death is the choice of someone who never understood the mission. Martyrdom made assassination even worse. Some people became more dangerous dead than alive. Their deaths inspired followers. Their absence created legends. A living official could be compromised, pressured, controlled. A martyred figure could not. Japanese history preserved this pattern, dramatic deaths turning into songs, stories, and proof of righteousness. Killing the wrong person didn't end a movement. It purified it. It hardened it. It gave it a symbol. Ninja clans recognized this. Sometimes the real neutralization was not murder, but discrediting, making someone look incompetent, corrupt, cowardly, breaking their image until even their own supporters stepped away. That required patience. The accusations had to feel plausible. They had to match existing suspicions. They had to arrive through trusted mouths. But when done correctly, character assassination outlived any blade. Violence also pulled resources like blood in water. Murders triggered crackdowns. Armies moved, roads tightened, regions locked down. The enemy became alert and defensive precisely when you needed them confused, complacent, exposed. Ninja operations worked best when nobody knew an operation was happening, when commanders made bad decisions and believed they were their own, when alliances collapsed and everyone blamed ordinary friction, when armies marched to the wrong place with complete confidence in their intelligence. All of that required invisibility. And the moment violence happened, invisibility ended. Blood-marked locations. Bodies proved hostile action. Investigations learned methods. Security adapted. The environment became harder to penetrate, with every consequence your own actions created. Smart ninja avoided this. They left no bodies, created no undeniable proof of presence, achieved objectives by bending information, not by eliminating people. Their greatest successes looked like nothing happened. This also protected the people who hired them. A daimyo could not afford a trail of murders pointing back to his court. Assassination shattered deniability. Bodies demanded accountability. Someone had to be responsible, and responsibility has a way of traveling uphill. But rumor, misdelivered letters, misunderstood orders, those were fog. How do you prove a false story was engineered instead of born naturally? How do you demonstrate intent behind confusion? Information manipulation could be denied because it could not be cleanly proven. And then there was chaos. Violence creates unstable aftermaths you can't control. Kill a leader and you can't choose what rises next. Power vacuums invite desperation. Desperate people make extreme decisions. A stable situation becomes volatile, and volatility is a fire that burns whoever stands closest. But ninja operations required control. They weren't trying to create chaos. They were trying to create specific results, precision outcomes that benefited an employer and left no fingerprints. That kind of control meant keeping people alive while changing what they believed, guiding them into actions that felt reasonable to them, but served purposes they couldn't see, letting the desired result emerge as if it were the natural shape of events. This was delicate work. It demanded psychology and politics, not muscle. It required understanding how decisions were made, where doubt could be planted, which fear would grow fastest, which story would be accepted without question. An assassin needs to know how to kill. A reality thief needs to know how the target thinks, what he trusts, what he suspects, what would make him turn on his own allies, what would make him act against his own interests while feeling justified. These are different skill sets, and the second was more valuable. Killing was easy. Maintaining a false world inside someone's mind was hard. And that false world could achieve what violence never could. It could make enemies defeat themselves, turn allies against each other, cause collapse without open battle, win wars before the first banner moved. This was the real power of ninja clans, not the ability to kill silently, but the ability to manipulate reality so completely that killing became unnecessary. And once you understand that, the question changes. The question is not how ninja killed. The question is how they convinced people to destroy themselves. What stealing reality actually meant. Reality is not what exists. Reality is what people believe exists. And the moment you understand that distinction, you understand how ninja actually operated. A castle commander doesn't respond to actual threats. He responds to threats he believes are real. If he believes an army is approaching from the north, he deploys troops north. If that belief is false, his rational decision produces irrational results. He hasn't been outmatched. He's been turned against himself. This was the core of ninja operations, not creating chaos, but creating false certainty, making people absolutely confident in information that was completely wrong, then letting their own competence become the weapon. Control the information, and you control the world it creates, because people act on information, not on facts. A general with accurate intelligence makes good decisions. A general with corrupted intelligence makes bad decisions with the same confidence. The outcome depends less on courage than on what reached his hands. Ninja clans positioned themselves at the choke points, messengers, scouts, translators, interpreters of foreign communications. They didn't need to invent every story. They only needed to control the pieces that mattered at the moment decisions were made. And they understood something most people miss. You don't have to control everything someone believes. You only have to control the beliefs that decide their next move. A commander might know supply levels, morale, and terrain perfectly, but if his picture of enemy position is wrong, everything built on that picture collapses. Shaping perception was more sophisticated than lying. A lie is brittle. It breaks when reality presses against it, but perception is self-reinforcing. Once someone believes something, they interpret everything through it. They find confirmation everywhere, convince a lord that an advisor is disloyal, and every ambiguous action becomes evidence. The advisor arrives late, avoiding scrutiny. The advisor urges caution, sabotage. The belief doesn't just explain events, it manufactures their meaning. Ninja operatives learn to plant those frameworks quietly, not with loud accusations, but with small pressures. A comment at the right time, a letter found by accident, a rumor carried through a mouth the target already trusted. The conclusion felt self-made, and a belief feels strongest when you think you discovered it alone. Creating false certainty was the goal. Uncertainty makes people hesitate. They gather more information, consult others, delay, but certainty creates movement. And if that certainty is built on false intelligence, they move decisively in the wrong direction. So ninja clans fed information that produced confidence, not outrageous claims that demanded investigation, but believable intelligence that fit existing expectations. Reports that seemed to come from reliable sources, details that could be partially confirmed by checking adjacent truths. A forged letter needed authentic seals. A false report needed plausible specificity. An impersonated official needed real procedures, real language, real timing. The lies were wrapped in truth, not to be poetic, but to survive contact with skepticism, to become solid after examination, not fragile. Believable lies were more dangerous than dramatic ones. Tell a commander his entire army deserted and he investigates immediately. Tell him 3 specific units are unreliable, and he believes it. He adjusts, redistributes forces, plans around the corruption without ever suspecting it was planted. The method was surgical. Identify the minimum falsehood that produces the desired outcome. Corrupt only that. Leave the rest intact so the lie lives inside a landscape of accuracy. Disrupting trust was a force multiplier. Once people stop trusting their own information networks, every decision becomes heavier. They waste time verifying what should be obvious. They second-guess reliable intelligence. They become slow, paranoid, and reactive. Ninja operatives made trust expensive. They engineered situations where acting on accurate information still led to disaster because the target didn't know what else had been changed around it. A commander who follows good intelligence into an ambush learns to distrust the very idea of intelligence. He can't distinguish between false reports and true reports that were made deadly by hidden variables. After enough of those experiences, the mind changes. Commanders trust nothing, move late, wait for certainty that never comes. They haven't been defeated militarily, they've been defeated psychologically. Their caution becomes their prison. Rewriting expectations did the rest. If you expect loyalty from an ally, silence is troubling but tolerable. If you've been conditioned to expect betrayal, the same silence becomes proof. Expectations decide how events are read. Ninja operatives managed those expectations methodically. A pattern of small betrayals that made larger betrayal feel inevitable. A string of deceptions that trained targets to see threat in ambiguity. Once the pattern exists, the target finishes the work. Neutral events become hostile. Coincidences become conspiracies. Allies become enemies without ever changing their behavior. Making enemies act against themselves was efficiency without spectacle. Why fight a man when you can make him fight himself? Why spend resources destroying a rival when you can guide his own decisions into collapse? A lord convinced his advisors are traitors purges his own government. An army convinced it faces overwhelming force retreats without battle. An alliance infected with suspicion fractures at the moment it is needed most. In every case, the target does the damage, while the manipulator stays out of view. And this scaled. Entire political situations could be tilted. Wars started or prevented, alliances formed or broken, succession crises triggered or contained, all by controlling what powerful people used to decide what was real. Deciding events before they happened was the highest expression of it. By the time a battle occurred, the outcome had already been shaped. The general deploying on false intelligence, the advisor giving counsel from forged documents, the alliance built on manufactured trust, failing at the critical moment. The battle itself was theater. The real war had been fought weeks or months earlier, in messages, rumors, assumptions, and the quiet space where certainty forms. This was why ninja were valuable despite being despised. They delivered outcomes traditional warfare couldn't. Victories without open confrontation. Objectives achieved without obvious fingerprints. A rival weakened in ways that looked natural, almost inevitable. But the power depended on something fragile. The target had to believe their reality was authentic. They had to trust their sources. They had to assume the world they were seeing wasn't being constructed for them. The moment someone recognized their reality had been stolen, the system collapsed. And that recognition was becoming easier. Japan was centralizing. Governments were building permanent intelligence structures. Rulers were learning the same techniques ninja clans had refined in the margins. The question was never whether stealing reality was powerful. The question was, what happened when everyone learned to do it? When the thief was no longer a specialist in the shadows, but the state itself. The message arrived sealed with authentic wax. The paper was the right quality. The calligraphy matched the official's hand so closely it felt familiar. The content was plausible, every detail engineered to survive inspection, except the official had never written it. A ninja operative had forged every element, seal, ink, tone, rhythm of language. And the message carried instructions meant to bend reality. troops sent to the wrong location, orders phrased to alienate a crucial ally, intelligence designed to trigger action too early, too late, or in the wrong direction. Forged messages were foundational tools, and they demanded obsessive skill. A forger studied handwriting until it became muscle memory, learned bureaucratic phrasing and the invisible hierarchy inside it, knew which seals were used for which purposes, which courtesies could be omitted, which could not, understood what kinds of orders would feel legitimate coming from specific names. The investment was worth it. A single document could redirect an army without moving a single soldier. It could spark diplomatic incidents. It could trigger internal investigations that froze a government in place. And if executed correctly, no one would understand what happened until long after the damage had taken root. The key was believability. The message had to ask for something the recipient could imagine being asked. It had to arrive through normal channels. It had to contain verifiable details, so the false core could hide inside a shell of truth. False envoys worked the same principle in human form. A ninja operative would appear as an official messenger, carrying documents that looked legitimate, knowing enough about the supposed sender to answer basic questions without hesitation. He delivered information calibrated to manipulate the recipient, not with wild claims, but with carefully weighted details. These impersonations required deep preparation. The operative had to know how real envoys walked into a room, how they bowed, what they offered first, which protocols could be bent and which would trigger alarm. Any deviation invited suspicion, so the performance had to be flawless. And it came with an advantage paper could not offer: directness. A false envoy could read the recipient's face and adjust, reinforce the lie through tone and timing, answer questions in ways that guided the target toward the conclusion the operative needed them to reach. It wasn't just deception, it was steering. Full impersonation of officials was riskier and far more powerful. An operative who successfully posed as a minor government functionary could enter restricted spaces, attend meetings, read confidential documents, and influence decisions directly instead of manipulating them from the margins. These operations could take months or years. The operative studied the official's habits, voice, mannerisms, relationships, responsibilities, waited for the narrow windows when the real person would be absent, and the disguise could live long enough to matter, but when it worked, it achieved what no external attack could. The operative wasn't outside the decision-making process. He was inside it, placing emphasis where it served him, burying what threatened him, shaping conclusions as they formed. Rumor engineering was subtler but no less effective. Ninja operatives understood how information moved through communities, who was trusted, which spaces carried gossip, which mouths turned a story into common knowledge. They knew how to phrase a suggestion so it would be repeated, refined, and weaponized by the people spreading it. A rumor campaign began with careful seeding, the same story told to multiple people in slightly different forms, so each listener believed they'd heard it from an independent source. When those listeners compared notes, the overlap created credibility. Confirmation was manufactured. The content had to strike the right nerve. People spread what makes them feel informed, what flatters their instincts, what validates their suspicions. A rumor that confirms what a community already fears travels faster than one that forces them to change their mind. And once it reached critical mass, it became self-sustaining. People embellished it, added details, connected it to other stories. The original false seed grew into an entire narrative constructed by the crowd itself, until the target community began to fracture under the weight of something that never happened. Sabotage without fingerprints required a different kind of thinking. Not dramatic destruction, but systemic weakening. Instead of cutting a bridge, you damaged support so it collapsed under ordinary use. Instead of stealing supplies, you contaminated them just enough to spoil. Instead of breaking a mechanism, you wore it down so failure looked like neglect. These operations left no clear evidence of hostile intent. Investigators found structural failure, not attack, natural decay, not deliberate damage. The target knew something went wrong, but proving sabotage was another matter entirely. Environmental manipulation extended the same logic. Ninja operatives studied how terrain and season shaped war. Rivers that rose high enough to slow crossings, roads that turned to mud, weather patterns that shifted logistics and timing. They used that knowledge to steer decisions. A forged message could delay a march until conditions became hostile. False intelligence could encourage a route that was manageable on paper, but punishing in the season. Armies actually traveled. The environment became an invisible accomplice, one the enemy blamed for poor planning, not manipulation. Psychological destabilization targeted the decision-makers themselves. Operatives learned the private fears of commanders and officials and built situations designed to press precisely on those weaknesses. Not random stress, tailored pressure. A commander afraid of betrayal encountered ambiguous evidence of disloyalty. An official haunted by incompetence suffered a series of small failures that seemed to confirm it. The distress was real because it exploited something already inside them. The manipulation was invisible because it looked like life. The cruelty was in the precision. The operative didn't break systems by force. He broke people by making them doubt their own perception. And above all was invisible coordination, the most sophisticated capability of all. Multiple operatives in different locations could execute complex plans without obvious communication, prearranged signals, timed actions, procedures agreed upon months earlier. A rumor in one city, a forged message in another, an impersonation in a third. Each incident looked isolated. Together they produced a single coordinated effect. The enemy saw coincidence. The reality thief saw design. The coordination sometimes extended beyond employers. Even when working for opposing sides, operatives could cooperate, sharing information that served both interests, avoiding needless interference, maintaining professional ties that outlasted temporary allegiances. It created an invisible network no single lord fully controlled. Ninja clans competed and cooperated at once, moving inside feudal structures while remaining, in a deeper sense, outside them. All of these methods shared one requirement: invisibility, not merely hard to detect, but difficult to prove even when suspected. Effects without causes, outcomes without origins, results that look natural while being engineered. And that invisibility wasn't just operational security, it was the nature of the work. The moment an operation became visible, it began to fail. The moment someone recognized they were being manipulated, they stopped trusting the information. The stolen reality snapped back into question, which revealed the vulnerability beneath the power. These operations devastated people who trusted their information environment, but they weakened against targets who assumed everything was manipulation, against rulers who trusted nothing. So the question wasn't whether ninja methods were effective. It was what happened when paranoia became institutional, when governments assumed all information could be false and built systems to verify everything independently. When that happened, ninja operations wouldn't just become harder, they would become impossible. The monk who swept the temple floors had been there for 3 years. Everyone knew him. Quiet, diligent, unremarkable. He attended ceremonies, repaired what needed repairing, kept his eyes lowered like a man devoted to discipline. He was also mapping every conversation that passed through that temple. Who visited, which officials arrived alone, and which arrived guarded by smiles, which merchants donated, and what they asked for in return, which families sought counsel, and which priest they trusted with what kind of confession. He was building a living diagram of relationships, social, political, economic, moving through a space everyone assumed was safe, because temples were not only spiritual centers, they were information hubs, places where classes mixed, where disputes were quietly negotiated, where delicate conversations happened away from formal scrutiny. Trust was built into the walls because sanctity disguised motive. A ninja operative posing as a monk could move through all of it without friction. He could listen without looking like he listened, ask questions that sounded like concern, not extraction, be present everywhere while appearing to belong nowhere. The cover worked because it didn't draw attention. Nobody suspects a monk of espionage. Nobody wants to. Traders were equally useful, and for the same reason. A merchant traveling between cities had every right to ask questions about local conditions. Who held power? Which roads were safe? What prices were rising? What tensions were brewing? A spy's questions wrapped in commerce sound like normal business. And merchants entered spaces others couldn't. They negotiated with castle administrators, visited depots, watched supply lines move, noted troop movements along trade routes. They built relationships across class lines because trade touched everyone. A ninja operating as a merchant could assemble networks no warrior could reach. The cover also paid for itself. Unlike a monk who needed support, a trader generated income. An operative could spend years embedded in a target city while running a legitimate business. The business became the operation. Customers revealed anxieties, suppliers offered access, transactions created leverage. Servants were the most invisible of all. Every household employed them. Every castle had dozens, sometimes hundreds. They cleaned rooms where confidential meetings happened, served meals during strategic discussions, carried messages and laundry, and weapons and silence. They were close enough to power to hear it breathe, and elites spoke in front of them as if they were furniture, background, non-witnesses, the perfect condition for intelligence gathering. A ninja operative working as a servant could observe everything while being seen by no one. The challenge was time. Servants lived in close quarters with other staff. They worked inside hierarchies that noticed small inconsistencies. An operative couldn't just pretend, they had to be competent. They had to understand the social currents of a household and survive them. They had to become so convincingly ordinary that even other servants never questioned them, which meant ninja training wasn't just stealth and tricks. It was domestic discipline, how to serve properly, how to maintain rooms, how to move through a household without leaving a ripple. Popular culture worships the blade. Real operations demanded the ability to be forgettable for years without breaking character. Living inside towns and temples meant learning rhythms. When markets grew loud enough that whispers could be caught without suspicion. When temple grounds emptied and documents became reachable. When households slept and movement stopped being watched. The operative became part of the environment's pattern, an element so familiar it stopped registering. Routine was everything. A ninja operative needed to know when officials met, when guards changed shifts, when deliveries arrived, when doors were unlocked, and when eyes were tired. That knowledge created windows, natural gaps that didn't look like gaps, where actions could occur without forcing anything. Mapping emotional weaknesses required patience. The operative watched how people reacted under pressure, which officials were ambitious and could be pulled with promises, which servants were resentful and could be recruited, which merchants were desperate and could be bought, who feared humiliation, who feared poverty, who feared what would happen to their family if they fell. This was more valuable than any document. Plans can change. Fear is consistent. An official terrified of disgrace could be guided by threats to reputation. A man protective of his children could be steered by hints that enemies were watching his home. The manipulation was never generic. It was tailored, made to fit the shape of a particular mind. Identifying leverage points went beyond individuals. The operative mapped systems, which supply chains were brittle, which alliances were unstable, which administrative processes depended on a single bottleneck, where a small disruption could cascade into failure without ever looking like an attack. A slightly contaminated grain shipment could weaken a garrison. A rumor about one merchant's reliability could destabilize an entire route. A forged message between allies could fracture a coalition. The operative didn't need to strike hard. They only needed to press where the structure already wanted to break. Infiltrating supply chains was especially powerful because supplies had to move. Food and weapons traveled through hands. Farmers, millers, bakers, transporters, merchants, warehouse managers, dozens of intermediaries, dozens of entry points. An operative inside that flow learned logistics the way a physician learns a body. Increased orders meant campaign preparation. Scarcity revealed vulnerability. Overconfidence showed itself in carelessness. And sabotage didn't have to be dramatic to be fatal. Slight spoilage, delayed deliveries, quiet redirection, damage discovered only when it was too late to correct. They could even manipulate prices and availability, creating artificial shortages, shifting demand, tightening and loosening pressure, all while it looked like ordinary market movement. Economic warfare disguised as commerce. Embedding long-term operatives was an investment that paid for years. An operative who spent a decade building a cover identity didn't just have access, they had credibility, relationships, trust. They were woven into the town's memory. Counterintelligence looks for strangers and recent arrivals, but someone who has lived there for 10 years, who is known by name, who belongs to local routines, that person is beyond suspicion. They aren't passing through the community, they are the community, and that is what made them dangerous. These operatives could activate when needed or simply observe continuously, human surveillance systems collecting everything while appearing ordinary. A network that didn't sleep, didn't announce itself, didn't need uniforms or offices. Normal life became intelligence infrastructure. Any space could be compromised. Any conversation could be overheard. The temple you prayed in, the merchant you trusted, the servant who cleaned your room. Any of them could be feeding information upward into an unseen structure. And the fear of that possibility mattered almost as much as the reality. Officials became cautious about what they said and where. They trusted fewer people. Decisions slowed, relationships frayed. The idea of invisible observation altered behavior, even when no observation was happening. This is what ninja operations achieved. They didn't just steal information, they transformed the social environment into uncertainty, where nothing felt secure, where anyone could be a watcher, where daily life itself became a weapon aimed at the mind. But that transformation had limits. It worked in decentralized feudal Japan, where communities were autonomous and central authority was weak, where movement was common and identities were difficult to verify. It would not work the same way in a centralized bureaucratic state, where travel was controlled, where identities were documented, where surveillance was official, permanent and everywhere, and that state was coming. The question was whether ninja clans could adapt, or whether the world that made them possible was about to erase them. The general received his intelligence at dawn. Enemy forces concentrated 30 miles north, roughly 5,000 troops, well supplied, preparing to advance within 3 days. The reports came from multiple scouts, the details aligned. The picture was clean, coherent, convincing, so he deployed accordingly. He shifted the bulk of his army north. You crept defensive positions, prepared for the battle he believed was inevitable. Every decision was rational, every move tactically sound, based on the information placed in front of him. The information was completely false. There was no army to the north. The real force was approaching from the east, twice the size, moving fast. By the time the general understood, his troops were out of position, and the battle was already decided. He hadn't been defeated by superior tactics. He had been defeated before the first clash. Ninja operatives had fed him a phantom army through channels he trusted. They built an enemy that existed only in reports, then watched him destroy himself with disciplined, intelligent planning. This is how wars were decided in feudal Japan, not only through heroics on the field, but through information warfare executed weeks earlier. The side with accurate intelligence won. The side operating inside a false picture lost. Combat was often just the final confirmation of results already shaped. Generals were primary targets, because generals move armies. Control what a commander believes about enemy position and strength, and you control where he concentrates force. You make him defend against threats that aren't real and leave the true approach exposed. But the manipulation had to be precise. Intelligence that was obviously wrong would be challenged. A general would investigate. He would demand confirmation. So the lie had to hide inside truth. Mostly accurate reports with one critical distortion embedded like a blade in cloth. Ninja operatives did this by corrupting scouting networks at multiple points, bribing real scouts to file altered reports, impersonating scouts with believable details, intercepting legitimate messages and changing them before delivery, building redundancy so the falsehood appeared independently confirmed when in reality it was being planted in parallel. Lords were isolated from truth through similar methods, but with different pressure points. A general needed operational clarity, routes, numbers, timing. A lord needed a strategic world, alliances, rivalries, openings, betrayal. So the isolation wasn't silence, it was volume. Lords received plenty of information. They were surrounded by letters, messengers, reports, but the critical pieces were poisoned. A forged message from an ally expressing hesitation, a planted report about an enemy's weakness, intelligence about political conditions that was carefully skewed. And a lord couldn't verify most of it. He couldn't ride to distant provinces to check. He couldn't independently confirm the motives behind private correspondence. He had to trust the network. Ninja operatives learned to corrupt the network exactly where verification was impossible. The most visible consequence was armies sent to the wrong places. An army was an enormous investment, thousands of men, months of provisions, a logistical tail stretched across provinces. Marching meant exhaustion, consumption, risk. If an army moved to meet a threat that didn't exist, the damage was real even without a single arrow loosed. Troops arrived tired. Supplies were burned protecting nothing. Strategic position weakened because force was deployed where it wasn't needed. Meanwhile, the real threat struck elsewhere, against defenses thinned by absence. Objectives fell with minimal resistance because defenders were marching the wrong direction with complete confidence. Ninja operations turned this into method. False threats to pull forces away from real targets, manufactured urgency to force premature movement, military planning itself weaponized, an enemy guided into wasting his own strength. Alliances collapsed the same way, through manufactured distrust. An alliance depends on mutual confidence. Each side must believe the other is reliable, acting in good faith, committed when pressure comes. Undermine that confidence, and the alliance rots from the inside. Ninja operatives manufactured evidence of betrayal, forged letters suggesting secret negotiations, false reports claiming withheld support, rumors that one side planned to abandon the other at the critical moment. It didn't have to be true. It only had to be believable. If both parties received proof that the other was wavering, they began acting defensively, and defensive precautions look like preparation for betrayal. Each side confirmed the other's suspicion through actions taken to prevent betrayal. The lie became self-fulfilling. Cooperation died without any actual treachery occurring. Castles were weakened the same way. A fortress that expects attack from one direction fortifies that side, shifts defenders, repositions supplies. All of it rational, if the intelligence is correct. But if the intelligence is false, preparation becomes sabotage. The strong side becomes irrelevant. The vulnerable side becomes fatal. Defenders concentrate where they're not needed. Supplies sit where they won't be reached. The castle defeats itself by obeying the reality it was given. Ninja operatives studied defenses and fed commanders information designed to make them prepare incorrectly. Strong where strength was unnecessary. Weak where weakness would be exploited. Defensive planning turned into a tool for creating exposure. And then there was the slow death. Resources wasted at scale. Medieval warfare was logistics as much as combat. Food, maintenance, replacement, transport. A domain that managed resources well could survive. A domain drained by panic and misdirection weakened long before battle. Ninja operations made enemies waste resources systematically. Troop deployments for phantom threats, defensive preparations for attacks that never came, forged orders that redirected supplies to useless locations. Each waste seemed small. The cumulative effect was strategic collapse. An army that burns 30% of its provisions responding to illusions is 30% weaker when the real threat arrives. A lord who prepares for the wrong contingencies has less capacity for the crisis that actually matters. The highest achievement was decision-making guided by illusions. Every military and political decision is built on a picture of reality. Corrupt the picture, and even the best reasoning produces ruin. Rationality becomes the weapon. The more carefully someone responds to false intelligence, the more efficiently they destroy themselves. This inverted the logic of war. Normally, better decisions lead to better outcomes. In a manipulated information environment, better decision-making can create worse outcomes because the inputs are poisoned. Victories without fighting were the proof. A castle surrenders because it believes reinforcements will never arrive. An army retreats because it believes it faces overwhelming force. A lord accepts humiliating terms because he believes his position is weaker than it truly is. No casualties, no ruined infrastructure, no resources consumed in open battle. Just false information changing what people believed was possible, until the enemy accepted defeat as the only rational option. But this system had a weakness. It depended on targets trusting their information sources, on networks being penetrable, on reality being manipulable. So the question wasn't whether these methods worked. It was what happened when governments recognized the vulnerability, when they built systems designed to resist manipulation, assumed intelligence could be false, and learned to verify everything independently. When that happened, the entire ninja model wouldn't just weaken, it would collapse. The end did not come through military defeat. It came through institutional evolution. After 1600, the Tokugawa shogunate unified Japan and began building something ninja clans could not outlast, a permanent state intelligence apparatus. For centuries, ninja had lived in the gaps, between competing domains, between official authority and actual control, between what governments claimed to know and what they truly knew. Those gaps were their terrain, their value, their oxygen. Centralized government closed them methodically. The shogunate extended administrative reach into every province. It built bureaucracies that monitored economic activity and social ties. It transformed the invisible into something legible, something recorded, categorized, checked, and followed, not through spectacle but through structure. There was no dramatic campaign to erase ninja villages, no public purge of intelligence networks. The shogunate did something colder than violence. It made ninja redundant. It created permanent institutions to perform the same work ninja once sold as mercenaries. The Metsuke, official inspectors, traveled constantly. They investigated local officials, monitored regions, reported threats. Their function mirrored the old shadow trade, but now it carried legal authority and government pay. The onmitsu worked more quietly. Covert agents embedded in domains, posing as merchants, monks, servants, occupying the same disguises ninja had perfected. They watched the same rooms, listened at the same thresholds, but they served the center, not temporary employers. What had been shadow function became state routine. Intelligence gathering turned into government work. Surveillance became administrative habit. Information manipulation became policy. Everything ninja clans had once done as outsiders was absorbed into permanent systems. And those systems had advantages ninja could not match. They could demand cooperation by law. They could pull from official records. They could coordinate across the country through state communication. They could operate openly when it benefited them and vanish when it didn't. Most importantly, they were controllable. The shogunate did not fear official agents selling information to rival domains, because rival domains no longer functioned as independent competitors. It did not need plausible deniability because its authority was the structure the country lived inside. It could apply intelligence openly because it was the law. Bureaucratic surveillance grew dense in ways feudal Japan had never experienced. Population censuses, travel permits, trade monitored at checkpoints, neighborhood associations documenting relationships and reporting suspicious behavior. The country became a mapped space, a registered space, a watched space, and that changed the operating environment completely. Ninja methods had thrived where identities were fluid and movement was normal, where a person could arrive, blend, rebuild a life, and become untraceable. But when travel was controlled and everyone was recorded, infiltration became exponentially harder. A ninja operative could no longer simply appear in a town and construct a clean identity. New arrivals were noted. People without documentation drew attention. The informal anonymity that once protected long-term covers was replaced by formal accountability. Paper, witnesses, reporting systems that never forgot. Shadow warfare didn't vanish. It became official. The shogunate didn't only gather intelligence, it shaped it. Rumors moved through controlled channels. Documents were forged to undermine threats. Psychological operations, the same kind of subtle pressure ninja clans had used, became tools the state could deploy as needed. But the state could do it at scale. Where a clan might manipulate a single lord, the shogunate could influence an entire region. Where ninja operatives worked in small teams, the government could deploy hundreds. The methods were familiar, the resources were not. This was the ultimate irony. The techniques that had made ninja valuable were absorbed into the structure that replaced them. The state learned to steal reality, to control information, to shape perception. It became a ninja operation, expanded to national size. And as it expanded, it watched everything, including those who had once monopolized the craft. The intelligence communities of Iga and Koga were infiltrated by the same techniques they had used on others. The unseen became seen. The watchers were watched. Independent clans began to lose their purpose. Domains no longer needed to hire ninja, and even if they wanted to, the shogunate forbade independent intelligence activity. Any daimyo caught employing ninja drew suspicion of rebellion. The market collapsed under fear. Some ninja were recruited into official service. The shogunate recognized their expertise and offered employment. But this was not continuation. It was absorption. They became functionaries. Their independence was stripped away, their clan identities thinned into paperwork. Those who accepted survived by surrendering what had made them ninja. They took salaries, followed orders, operated inside hierarchies. Their skills remained, but their autonomy died. They became part of the system they once moved around. Others tried to remain independent. They offered services quietly, privately, in the old ways. But the calculus had changed. Unauthorized intelligence work was treated as treason. Getting caught meant execution, and potential employers were too afraid to risk it. Risk had always been part of the profession. But when the danger became absolute and the payment unreliable, the work stopped being sustainable. People found other ways to live, ways that didn't require gambling their lives for employers who could no longer protect them. Survival became redundancy. Ninja clans had endured for generations because they provided something no one else could. But when the state provided the same service more efficiently, backed by law and scale, the independent model collapsed. A trained operative could no longer sell infiltration profitably when the marketplace had been replaced by a monopoly. Some communities transitioned into legitimate occupations: farming, trade, craft, discipline redirected into ordinary labor. Their children grew up without learning the old work. The knowledge faded with the generation that carried it. Others moved into cities where their pasts dissolved into crowds. They took new names, married into families with no ties to intelligence work. Let the continuity break quietly. Within a couple of generations, the clan identity wasn't hunted, it simply disappeared. The ninja function died even as individuals survived. Because the function Independent intelligence sold to competing domains required political conditions that no longer existed. Unified Japan had no open competition between powers, no exploitable gaps, no space for autonomous networks to thrive. The state learned the lesson ninja had lived by. Control of information is control of reality, and control of reality is power. It didn't need mercenaries to teach it anymore. It institutionalized the knowledge, made it permanent, scaled it beyond anything a clan could sustain. By the mid-17th century, ninja as distinct operational entities had effectively ceased to exist. Individuals with training persisted, but the networks dissolved, the autonomous communities were absorbed. The alternative structure was gone. What remained were traces, memories, accounts of methods, stories told by people who no longer had a place to practice what they remembered. Because the state had won by becoming what ninja had been, turning shadow warfare into policy and manipulation into routine, a monopoly on stolen reality. And when everyone steals reality, no one needs specialists. So the question stopped being what ninja were or how they operated. The question became what would replace the truth. When the clans were gone, the work was silent, and only the costume was left to remember them. By the time kabuki theater discovered ninja, the real ones had been gone for generations. No one in the audience had met an actual operative. No one remembered what the work looked like. The stage version owed nothing to history, only to entertainment. And entertainment needed something kabuki could show, something visual, immediate, something that could live inside 2 hours of spectacle, not weeks of quiet corrosion. You cannot stage information manipulation. You cannot choreograph the slow collapse of trust. You cannot make forgery look thrilling from the back rows. You cannot turn psychological destabilization into a clean, visible scene. Real ninja work was designed to be unseen and unprovable. Theater requires the opposite, so theater transformed them. The ninja became an acrobatic warrior, leaping, climbing, vanishing, returning with steel. A character type built for dramatic entrances and physical conflict. A figure the audience could recognize at a glance, and fear without explanation. The famous black costume was a theatrical invention. It came from stagehands, dressed in black, to signal they were invisible within the story, present, but not part of the world the audience was meant to see. Playwrights realized they could weaponize the convention. A stagehand could suddenly become a ninja. In one moment, the invisible became lethal. It was brilliant stagecraft, and completely ahistorical. Real ninja dressed to disappear into ordinary life. Farmers, merchants, monks, servants, anything that blended. A uniform that announced itself would have been self-defeat, but black was perfect on stage. It read instantly, so it became the image, and once the image existed, it began replacing the thing it claimed to represent. Costumes replaced methods because costumes could be seen. A man in black is legible from a distance. A man manipulating information looks like everyone else. Theater needed shorthand. The costume provided it. From there it migrated into every medium that followed. Violence replaced psychology for the same reason. Violence is stageable. A fight can be choreographed. An assassination can be dramatized. Combat is a language audiences understand immediately. Psychological manipulation is slow, quiet, ambiguous, exactly what theater struggles to hold without words, and words were never the point. So the ninja became killers. Their function shifted from information theft to assassination. Their skills were reimagined as combat tricks instead of intelligence craft. Their operations were simplified into missions that ended with bodies, because bodies are proof on stage, because a blade gives closure. In the process, everything that made ninja historically dangerous was erased. The ability to corrupt reality disappeared. The capacity to make enemies defeat themselves was forgotten. The thief of perception became an acrobatic murderer. Legends replaced survivors because the survivors weren't there to correct it. The people who had done the work were old or dead, And even if someone spoke, why would anyone listen? The theatrical ninja was more exciting than any quiet account of forged letters and poisoned trust. So stories accumulated without restraint, ninja walking on water, becoming invisible without disguise, reading minds, commanding animals. Every retelling added something impossible, because impossible was entertaining. These elements came from folklore and martial fiction, not from intelligence work. They had no relationship to what ninja had actually done, but they made better stories, and better stories displaced true ones. Within a few generations, the myth wasn't an embellishment. It was all that remained. Entertainment simplified power into something people could understand. Real power, the ability to shape what others believe is true, is abstract and unsettling. It doesn't look like strength. It looks like normal life continuing while something inside it bends. But physical power, the ability to kill, that is simple, visual, portable. So ninja became symbols of physical mastery rather than informational control. Elite fighters rather than intelligence specialists. The complexity of their work was compressed into action narratives that required no context, no politics, no uncomfortable realism. And once disconnected from history, the concept became infinitely reusable. A ninja assassin could exist in ancient Japan, modern cities, even science fiction futures. The character survived because it had become a costume you could drop into any setting. A historical actor became a genre. This inversion was profitable. Ninja as killers sold tickets, sold toys, sold games, built recognizable brands. Fictional ninja became more commercially valuable than historical ones. So culture produced fictional ninja in endless quantity. Tourism reinforced it. Places tied to ninja history recognized the economic opportunity. Visitors wanted authentic ninja experiences, but authenticity meant matching expectations, not matching evidence. So attractions leaned into black costumes, throwing stars, acrobatics, secret techniques, because that's what tourists arrived wanting to see. And it created a feedback loop. Entertainment drew from tourist attractions. Attractions copied entertainment. Each iteration pushed further from reality until the connection became decorative, an aesthetic, not a history. Education couldn't compete with that machine. A lecture reaches dozens. A movie reaches millions. An academic article is read by specialists. A game is played globally. The scale is incomparable. And the entertainment version feels better. It offers clear heroes and villains, spectacle, clean stakes, simple moral shapes. The real history offers ambiguity, compromise, and the uncomfortable truth that control often comes through manipulation, not valor. Entertainment is designed to be enjoyed. History is designed to be accurate. Commercially, accuracy loses. So the myth didn't bury the truth by suppressing it. It buried the truth by replacing it. Young people met ninja first through fiction, films, comics, games. That became their baseline reality. By the time they encountered history, correction felt like subtraction, not discovery. The myth was already installed, and the final irony is almost too perfect. Ninja were thieves of reality. They stole what people believed was true and replaced it with manufactured perception. And then their own reality was stolen, replaced by manufactured myth. The technique survived, turned back on its originators. They had understood that narrative is more powerful than territory, that perception can override facts, that the story people believe shapes outcomes more reliably than what actually happened. Their story proves it, because the ninja that exists in global culture now, the black-clad acrobatic assassin, never existed historically. That figure is manufactured certainty, an illusion repeated until it feels like memory, a costume mistaken for truth. The method endured even as the practitioners disappeared. So the question isn't whether the myth is entertaining. The question is what it costs to replace a difficult truth about information warfare with an easy fantasy about killers. And whether at this point the myth has become the only reality most people will ever know. finishing what the shogunate began, not by outlawing the ninja, but by making sure no one remembers what they truly were. The real ninja were not warriors, they were not heroes, they were not even soldiers, they were engineers of uncertainty. They didn't conquer land, they didn't defeat armies, they stole the reality other people were living in. And when governments learned to steal reality themselves, the ninja no longer had a reason to exist. If you want history beyond battles and legends, subscribe to Fragments of History. Because the most powerful wars are not fought on fields, they are fought inside the mind.